Hello and welcome to Algebra 1, Chapter 8.3, and today we're discussing factoring trinomials in the form x squared plus bx plus c. So specifically these have a leading coefficient of 1, so it's x squared plus 3x plus 2, something like that. So it's 1x squared, there's not going to be another number out front. Okay, the first thing we're going to look at is a pattern for factoring trinomials. And so we're going to go the other way. We're actually going to multiply. Because remember, factoring is undoing that multiplication. So if we start with multiplying, and let's look at x plus 3 times x plus 4, and we're going to FOIL. So we are going to get x squared for first, plus 4x for the outside, plus 3x for the inside, plus 12 for last, and that simplifies into x squared plus 7x plus 12. And so if we are comparing it to this form up here, x squared plus bx plus c, do you see that our x squared, which we have an x squared, came from first times first? So this was the f of our FOIL. Okay. And that our C, our 12, came from last times last. So that was the L of our FOIL. And so then guess where B came from? And if we look at that whole term there in the middle, so if we have our 7x here, this was O plus I of FOIL, which were these two terms up here. And so really what we have is we have undone our foiling. So if we start with this and go that way, we want to undo our foiling. So if really quickly, if we just look at x squared plus 5x plus 4, the way that we're going to foil today the way that we're going to factor today is what can I put in here into these 4 spots that's going to undo my FOIL? Well, it has to be x and x because that's what makes x squared. And so these last spots has to be something that multiplies to be 4, because notice in this previous example 3 and 4 multiplied to be 12. So what multiplies to be 4? Well, you can do 2 and 2, or you can do 4 and 1. But when I do O and I, realize they're going to have to make that middle term. So which pair here makes that middle term? It's going to be 4 and 1. And so if we do plus plus, what I get, there's my x squared, there's my plus 4 at the end, and then I have a 1x and a 4x that goes together to make 5x. So that is that answer there. So this method I just walked through is a trial and error method. So I'm going to do 2 different methods for you. So we're going to start out by the trial and error method, and this one should be fairly easy because we actually just kind of looked at it. But trial and error method is you start out with parentheses, and you'll go, okay, well what has to go in the first spots? And that has to be x at the moment, because x times x is the only way you're going to make x squared. And then the question is what has to go in the other spots that they are going to multiply to be 12. Well, to multiply to be 12, you got 1 and 12, you got 2 and 6, you got 3 and 4. But when I do, there's O and I have to be able to make 7. So what do I need to put in those spots that's going to help me make 7? And the answer then is 3 and 4. And if I want a positive 12, my signs have to be the same because I'm multiplying to be a positive. And I also want to add to be a positive 7, so that it's plus and plus. And there is my answer. Okay, so let's look at the trial and error method again. So you start with parentheses. And so what has to go in the beginning? It has to be a and a because that's the only way I'm going to make a squared. On the other side, though, to multiply to be 15, it could be 1 and 15, or it could be 3 and 5. Those are my factors of 15. But if I want to add to be 8, it's going to have to be 3 and 5. And again, if we're multiplying to be a positive, the signs have to be the same. If we're adding to be a positive, then they both have to be plus. You should be able to FOIL this and get back to where we came from. You are never changing the problem, you're only rewriting it. Okay, so something like this, let's still look at trial and error at the moment. You can turn around if you want to. You don't have to turn around. In fact, we might look and see what the book does, but if you keep it like this, the t just goes on this side. Okay? And then the questions are, what do I multiply to get 9? And it could be 1 and 9, or it could be 3 and 3. And I want to make a 10 in the middle, so it's 1 and 9. And again, they're both positive. Okay, so there's another method that I want to show you, and we're going to call it the AC method. And what you do is it uses factoring by grouping. And you might find trial and error method may be easier now for this section, but in the next section we're going to have a leading coefficient that is something other than 1, and actually makes it a little bit easier. And so the first thing you're going to do is this number right here is A, this number is C. You're going to multiply them together, signs included, and so we're going to get a positive 27. So we'd say like AC, that's A times C is 27. So what are my factors of 27? Well, they can be 1 and 27. They can be, at the same time, they can be negative 1 and negative 27. 27 is positive. 3 and 9 and negative 3 and negative 9. And I want to figure out which set there gives me a negative 12. So then that answer was negative 3 and negative 9 would give me a negative 12. So if I rewrite this, x squared, and I'm going to write minus 3x minus 9x plus 27. Is that the same as what I just had, just written differently? Does that still say x squared minus 12x plus 27? Okay, so from here then, factor by grouping. So we're going to pull an x out and have x minus 3. I'm going to pull a negative 9 out because I want an x minus 3 again. Then I'm going to pull the x minus 3 out front and have an x minus 9 left over. And so still factored, we just split up the middle term and factored by grouping. All right, if you are going to factor by grouping, it does probably make more sense to switch this around. So we're going to switch that around and put the m squared in the front. And you know, there's times I think that factoring by grouping is beneficial, and there's times that I think that we'll do just fine without it. This would be a time I probably wouldn't factor by grouping, because if I'm looking at 21, I know this has to be 21 times 1. Okay, so I would probably do trial and error on this one and make it 21 and 1, because that's how you make 22. Now, to multiply to be a positive, they have to have the same sign, but I want them to add to be a negative, so they do both need to be negative, so that I get the minus 21 minus 1 to give me that minus 22. So that then is your answer. Alright, so let's look at that AC method again with this one. So A times C is going to be 1 times 28, so that's going to be 28, and it's a positive 28. So what are all my factors of positive 28? Well, I could have 1 and 28, I could have negative 1 and negative 28, 2 and 14, or negative 2 and negative 14. Let's see here, 4 and 7, and negative 4 and negative 7. I think that's it. And so I'm trying to find something that's going to give me a negative 11. I think that one right there is our best bet. So if we have s squared minus 4s minus 7s plus 28, so you've just rewritten it with negative 11s spelled out, and then you're going to do your factoring by grouping. So let's pull an s out from the first ones, and let's pull a negative 7. so that I have an s minus 4, because remember we really want to match those up, and then I get s minus 4 times s minus 7. Okay, why don't you pause the video, and I really want you to try this. Can you factor this? Either use trial and error or the AC method. So go ahead and pause the video. Alright, and hopefully you got x plus 6 times x minus 3. If you didn't, FOIL out what you got and see, does it get you back here? And if not, where could you have tweaked it to have gotten the right numbers? Okay, and one more time, I really want you to pause the video and see if you can do this on your own. Alright, and you should have gotten h plus 8 times h minus 5. One thing to keep in mind, if this is a minus sign, your signs have to be different. Okay, the only way you're going to multiply to be a negative is if you have a positive times a negative. And then you really need to make sure that if you're aiming for a positive in the middle number, that your bigger number is positive. If you're aiming for a negative for the middle number, that your bigger number is negative. Okay, let's try it one more time. Note the signs, both negative in this case, so why don't you go ahead and pause the video and see what you can do here. Okay, and you should have gotten r minus 6 times r plus 4. Again, with the last term as a negative, you have to have different signs, and this time you were aiming at a negative for the middle sign, and so that larger number was negative. Okay, so let's just walk through this one together here. This would be one that I would do trial and error. Of course, I've done this one 100 times. To make 20, you're looking at 1 and 20, 2 and 10, 4 and 5. If I'm trying to get a 1 in the middle, it has to be 4 and 5. I typically put my numbers in and then I put in my signs. I have to have one of each sign, and I want a negative in the middle, and so if I do a negative 5 and a positive 4, that will give me that negative 1 in the middle. So the next thing we're going to look at is solving these. These are quadratics. They have an x squared in them, and we're going to use the property we talked about in 8.3 called the zero product property. So if I have this written as multiplication, then I can set each factor equal to 0. So it's up to you how you feel more comfortable in factoring. If we do this one by trial and error, I'm looking for what multiplies to be negative 15 and adds to be 2. And I think if we did 5 and 3, and we're going to do a positive 5 and a negative 3. And then we're going to set both factors equal to 0 and solve them both. So you're going to get two answers. Okay, so we have our two answers there. So those are our answers, and then you always want to check your answers, especially in algebra. So if I check negative 5 first, remember you can only check one answer at a time. You can't plug in two different x's. That's going to be a positive 25 minus 10 minus 15. And 25 minus 10 is 15. 15 minus 15 is 0. All right. And then the other one, let's see here. So we're going to look at 9 plus 6 minus 15. Well, 9 plus 6 is 15. Minus 15 is 0. So being that the property is called the zero product property, it does have to be set equal to 0 before you start. So always, if you are solving by factoring, has to be set equal to 0. So we have to get that. And then let's look at our AC method in this case. So if A times C equals 28, what are my factors of 28? So we get 1 and 28. And I'm only going to look at positives because that first term there is also positive. 2 and 14, 4 and 7, and so what's going to give me 16? It's going to be 2 and 14. So if we do x squared plus 2x plus 14x plus 28, by the way, if you switch the 2 and the 14, you are going to get the same answer. Some factoring by grouping here. Let's look at pulling out an x for an x plus 2. And we're going to pull out a 14 for an x plus 2. And pull out the x plus 2. We're left with x plus 14. And so that now is factored. So from there you set both factors equal to 0. And solve both of those. So it looks like we're going to get a negative 14 and a negative 2. You know, and they should, at the moment, always work when you put them back in, because they are the answers you found. So if they don't work when you put them back in, don't say no solution. Find your error, because you had to have messed up someplace. Okay, so if I put in negative 2 squared plus 16 times negative 2, what we're going to end up with is positive 4 minus 32. Okay, and then actually doing this, 4 minus 32 is negative 28, so that one works. And then if we put in negative 14, oh boy, I should have brought a calculator, huh? Let's see here, 14 squared I think is 196. And so it would be 196 plus 32 more, 98. I think it's going to be minus 228. No, that's not right, because that would give me 28. Alright, so that actually I think is supposed to be a 4. So that the difference there is negative 28. There we go. Alright, math without a calculator. Gotta love it. Alright, so let's look at one more here real quick. So do remember zero product property is it does have to be equal to 0. So we get g squared plus 6g minus 27. And then whichever way that you want to factor, by trial and error or the AC method. So I grew up doing trial and error, so that one becomes more natural for me. So this is g plus 9g minus 3, because that's going to make a negative 27, and then a positive 9 minus 3 is a positive 6. So we're going to set both answers equal to 0. I can write it out correctly here. Minus 3 equals 0. And you're going to get negative 9 and positive 3 for your answers. So I will let us ignore that last check just as a little reward for getting through the whole section. So great job. Let me know if you have any questions. We will definitely go over this in the class the next time, but make sure you're prepared with the questions you need answered. And if you want them answered before class, come and see me. If not, have a great day.